Here's something completely insane about shipping. Every year, thousands of shipping containers just disappear. And I'm not talking about theft or pirates. I'm talking about containers that shipping companies themselves report as lost, even though they know exactly where they are. In 2023 alone, over 15,000 containers were officially reported as missing. That's 15,000 steel boxes worth $3,000 to $4,000 each, filled with cargo worth millions. But here's the crazy part. In a lot of cases, losing them on purpose is actually the smart business move. And the reasons why will completely change how you think about global shipping. To understand this mess, you need to know that containers get lost in three completely different ways. The first way is what you'd expect, containers actually falling off ships into the ocean. The second is way more common. It's called container orphaning, where boxes get abandoned because moving them costs too much. And the third? That's when containers enter what the industry calls the shadow fleet, where they keep working, but nobody officially owns them anymore. Let's start with the dramatic one first. Every year, around 1,500 to 3,000 containers literally fall off ships and sink to the bottom of the ocean. Now, before you freak out, remember there are 250 million container shipments happening every year, so we're talking about 0.001% of all containers. Tiny percentage, but when it happens big.
November 2020. A massive ship called the One Apis hit a brutal storm in the Pacific Ocean. When the crew checked the damage, 1,816 containers were either lost overboard or destroyed. At $50,000 per container, including the cargo inside, that one storm cost over $90 million. And that's not even the worst incident. In 2013, a ship called the MOL Comfort literally broke in half in the middle of the Indian Ocean. All 4,293 containers on board went straight to the seafloor. Just gone. So why does this still happen? You'd think with all our technology we'd have solved this by now. The problem is something called parametric rolling. When a ship hits certain wave patterns at specific angles, it creates this pendulum effect. The ship can roll up to 40 degrees, but most containers are only secured to handle about 25 degrees of roll. So when you hit that perfect storm, the twist locks holding the containers just snap. And once one container breaks free, it's game over. The ship becomes unbalanced, which causes more rolling, which knocks more containers loose. It's a domino effect. And here's where the insurance gets wild. When a container falls off a ship, you'd think the shipping company has to pay for it, right? Wrong. Most cargo has separate insurance bought by whoever shipped the goods, and the shipping line's liability, it's capped at about $500 per container or $2 per kilogram of cargo.
So imagine you're shipping $100,000 worth of iPhones. The container falls off. The shipping company might owe you $2,000. Maybe. That's why smart companies buy their own insurance. But the shipping companies still hate losing containers, not just because of bad PR. Every container that goes overboard is one they can't use again. And a new 40-foot container costs about $3,800 right now. During the container shortage in 2021, that price hit $9,000. When the One Apis lost 1,816 containers, they lost at least $6.9 million worth of steel boxes that had to be replaced. Across the whole industry, we're talking about $5.7 million to $11.4 million in lost containers every year. And that's just the boxes, not the stuff inside. But here's the thing. Those dramatic sinkings, they're actually the smallest part of the problem. The second type of loss is way more common, and it explains why ports around the world are completely buried in abandoned containers. This is what I call the economic loss. Picture this. You've got a container that successfully delivered its cargo to Los Angeles. Job done. Except now you've got an empty box sitting in LA, and it needs to get back to Shanghai for the next shipment. Moving that empty container back costs about $2,200 in fees. Meanwhile, a brand new container from a Chinese factory costs $3,800. So you'd think, okay, cheaper to move the old one back, right? But you're missing something huge. That $2,200 is pure cost. You're paying to move an empty box, zero revenue. But if you buy a new container in China, it gets filled immediately with cargo heading to the US. So you're not comparing $2,200 versus $3,800.
You're comparing $2,200 in dead cost versus $3,800 minus the $4,000 to $10,000 you make on that first trip. Suddenly, buying new and leaving the old one behind makes perfect sense. This is why, in 2022, the Port of Long Beach had over 110,000 empty containers just sitting there. Nobody wanted to pay to ship them back to Asia. The port charges storage fees, usually $100 to $300 per day after the free period ends. So shipping companies have three options: pay storage fees forever, pay $2,200 to ship them back empty, or write them off as lost and walk away. A lot of times they choose option 3. The container officially becomes lost, even though it's sitting right there in the port. But wait, it gets weirder. There's a third category called ghost containers. These are containers that are actually working, moving cargo, making money, but they've been off the books for so long that nobody knows who owns them anymore.
Here's how it happens. A shipping line leases containers from a company like Triton or Textainer. These leasing companies own about 55% of all containers in the world. The lease might be for 5 years, but containers move around so fast that sometimes a Maersk container ends up being used by MSC, who loans it to a smaller carrier who uses it once and leaves it somewhere. A few years later, the original lease expires. The leasing company writes it off as lost, but the container is still out there. It's in Pakistan or Brazil or the Netherlands, still moving cargo. But technically, nobody owns it. The industry estimates that 3 to 5% of all containers are ghost containers. With 50 million containers in the global fleet, that's 1.5 to 2.5 million boxes whose ownership is basically unknown. Some of these containers have been working for 20 years, way past their expected 12 to 15-year lifespan. They just keep getting used because nobody bothers to track them. Now, you might be thinking, can't we just track them with GPS? We can track a $10 air tag. Surely we can track a $4,000 container. And you're right, we have the technology. Companies like Hapag-Lloyd and MSC have spent hundreds of millions putting GPS and sensors on their containers.
But here's the problem. It's not about technology. It's about incentives. If you're a shipping company and you know exactly where all your empty containers are, you're responsible for them. You have to pay storage fees. You have to decide whether to move them. But if a container is lost, that's just an insurance claim. You get paid $3,800, buy a new one, and move on. This is why even with all this tracking technology, the industry still reports 15,000 containers missing every year. It's not a tracking problem. It's an economics problem. And then there's the environmental nightmare. When containers sink to the ocean floor, they don't just disappear. Each one has 2.2 tons of steel, plus whatever was inside. Containers with electronics leak toxic metals. Ones with plastic release microplastics as they rust. Chemicals in batteries? They can leak for decades. In 2013, a ship called the Rena crashed off New Zealand and spilled 900 containers into the ocean. 5 years later, divers were still finding containers on the seafloor, slowly rusting open and poisoning the water. The abandoned containers on land aren't much better. Many end up in poor countries, used for storage or housing. Old refrigerated containers still have toxic gases that should be properly disposed of. But if a container has been lost, nobody takes responsibility.
So what's being done? In 2020, new international rules required better weight checks and stronger lashing systems. Some shipping lines are testing blockchain tracking that would create a permanent record of who owns each container. And there's a push to treat containers as valuable assets to manage, not disposable boxes to abandon. But here's the truth. Until the economics change, containers will keep getting lost. As long as buying new is cheaper than recovering old. As long as storage costs more than just walking away. As long as insurance pays out when containers conveniently disappear from the paperwork. Shipping companies will keep losing 15,000 containers every year. Think about that for a second. This industry moves 90% of everything you own. The entire global economy runs on it. And they're operating a system where losing track of millions of dollars worth of stuff is just considered normal business. The question is, should we accept this? Or does the industry that literally moves the world need to do better? What do you think? Should there be stricter rules on container tracking? Or is losing containers just the cost of keeping your Amazon packages cheap? Let us know in the comments below.